وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Abdullah Mitchell. Welcome everyone. We will start in another 4 minutes, just coordinating with our panelists before we begin. Thank you. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, Habib. Can you hear me?
Yes.
How are you this morning?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Okay. Just want.
Salam alaikum, Brother Abdullah. After you make the introductions, if you, I can share my screen if that's easier for you.
Okay. All right. All right. Do you here? Let me make sure. I'm going to make both you and Habib co-host. Okay. Let me do that right now. As soon as I see you.
Now you can see me flying there.
All right. Okay, I just confirmed you. Now you're both co-hosts. You see that? So, Kamal, if you've got the presentation, if you want to put it up, since you're going to be starting it, I'll just go through the first slides, and then, all right, or I could do it off of mine, do the first slides, and then you put it up on your screen and go from there.
That's fine. You can start and then share. I'll share my screen and go from there.
All right, and then Habib, if you could put the presentation, then you can share it as well from your screen, and then that way you can flick the slides as you deem appropriate. You don't have to say next slide, that kind of thing.
Okay, got it.
All right, so I just want to confirm y'all already you got up on your computer. So what I'll do then, I'm going to put it up. I'll go through the first initial slides, then you would I would relinquish it over to you, and then you start it from there. Because in essence, you'll be switching over because you got co-hosts. You can just take over from there. Okay. All right. Inshallah. All right. We'll be in about 2 minutes. We'll begin 11:04. Giving people, you can hear still ringing. People still joining. So let's allow them a moment to join. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of CIOGC and the CIOGC Joint COVID-19 Task Force, we welcome you all to the latest webinar to address issues as they arise as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yesterday, the state of Illinois entered into phase 4 of the Restore Illinois program. The Restore Illinois program is designed to gradually lead us back to a degree of normality in this during the course of this pandemic. As you are aware, or may or may not be aware, attended to this staged reopening are gradual relaxations of the restrictions that were initially imposed back in March of this year. Phase 4 expands or relaxes some of these restrictions as it relates to businesses, but more particularly, there are issues as they relate to the opening of schools in the state of Illinois. Today, we have two panelists, Dr. Kamal El-Darari, PhD, RN, and Associate Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Illinois at Chicago. We're also joined with Dr. Habib Qadri, the president and principal of the MCC Academy in Morton Grove, Illinois, to share their knowledge and expertise as they relate to these timely subjects. And I want to make a couple of preliminary remarks before they begin. As we have a large number of participants, it is very important that you would mute your phone or your speaker so that it does not distract from the presentation. In the course of this presentation, if you have questions arise, please submit them on the chat messaging feature. Those questions are, the chat is being monitored, and inshallah, we will present those questions to the panelists at the conclusion, at the commence of the question and answering period. And then finally, please don't use the chatting as a way to conduct questions or comments independent of the presentation. There'll be ample time for that at the conclusion to share any viewpoints you want to add to the discussion or further clarify that. The next point we wanted to make is, once again, the information provided in this webinar is for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be professional or legal advice. Our recommendation to you is that what we have learned in terms of conducting these webinars is that the information that is coming out sometimes is found to be conflicting, and the official public health guidances change frequently. As a result, we encourage you to follow the local, state, and federal guidelines, and we are including those websites for you. What our panelists have done has reviewed all the latest up-to-date information and presenting you with a timely presentation. However, that still does not relieve us of the obligation to continue to pursue, because as the numbers change, the infection rates change, guidances change, public health guidance change. So with that as a preliminary, inshallah, we hope that you will find this morning's presentation helpful, because a lot of effort was made by our panelists to provide you a timely and insightful insight to not only phase 4, but what this means in terms of our schools and reopening and the coming fall semester. So at this point in time, inshallah, we'll turn the mic over to Dr. El-Darari.
Yeah, Brother Mitchell, you can continue advancing the slides. I think it's
all right.
Easier. Just go ahead and continue, and I will let you know which ones to advance to.
All right.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I would like to start by thanking all of you for joining this session this morning on a Sunday. Jazakumullah khair for your effort and for your commitment. We thought to put together this webinar to start the conversation about opening. It's not meant to be the only webinar. This is an introductory webinar. As you know, guidelines are being developed now by school districts and private and public schools alike. And probably more information will be materializing in the coming days. Before I start, I would like to start by encouraging and asking everybody to continue to protect others from COVID-19. And I use the word continue here because we see a relaxation of efforts. You know, some people are not wearing their masks, and people, we want to make sure people continue to do these measures. Wash your hands frequently and thoroughly. Cover your mouth and nose, and wear a face cover or mask when in public. Keep a physical distance of 6 feet or 2 meters from others, and stay out of crowded places and large gatherings. And definitely, you need to avoid, you know, handshaking and kissing and hugging. And basically, want to clean and disinfect frequently. Advance, please. We'll basically start with an update about the state of where we are at with the numbers. As you know, in the United States, we have over 2.5 million cases and over 125,000 deaths. Trends are upward in many of the United States. So although in Illinois, things are looking good, are looking better. Basically, things are not, you know, rates are increasing in many states. And let's move to Illinois. Next slide, please. So in Illinois, as of yesterday, we have over 141,000 confirmed cases and around 7,000 confirmed deaths. Keep going. So I just want to highlight the fact that this graph shows the confirmed cases in Illinois. And as you can see toward the middle of the graph, we see a large percentage among those 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49. So it's not just a disease for those who are older. This is the message I'm trying to highlight, as we are seeing younger people venturing out and sometimes, you know, not abiding by the guidelines. It's a reminder for all of us. You know, a large percentage of young people get it, and a large percentage, in fact, most of the cases, as you can see, most of the cases are below the ages of 60. Although if you go to the next slides, most of the deaths are for older people. Most of the deaths are among older people, but that doesn't mean, you know, we younger people, we can you know, relax and not abide to the guidelines, because there is a risk for younger people to acquire the disease, and once they have it, you know, some survive, some don't, but also they can transmit it to others in their household, others in the community. To the next slide, please. So now, alhamdulillah, we are in phase 4. As you remember, our governor, you know, and his team developed, you know, five phases early on to restore Illinois. And alhamdulillah, we have advanced to phase 4, the revitalization phase, basically. And that's because we are seeing continued decline in the rate of infection, and hospitals have capacity and can quickly adapt for a surge of new cases. And we have testing now widely available, and tracing is ongoing and is very common now. So now, what does that mean? So next slide, please. So now we are in phase 5, in phase 4, basically. So gatherings of 50 people or fewer are allowed. Restaurants and bars can reopen, travel resume, childcare and schools reopen under guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health. Slide. Brother Mitchell, next.
Next slide.
Yes. So this is a summary of what can happen in phase 4. Gathering less than 50 or less are allowed. However, this limit is subject to change based on data and guidance. So if we start seeing resurgence, the number, these guidelines might change. So now I want to emphasize here, because I know some people who joined us are also heads of Islamic organizations and masajid. The previous guidelines for places of worship still apply. So remember, for places of worship, and we issued detailed guidelines, CIGC COVID-19 Joint Task Force. We issued detailed guidelines for places of worship, worship. And what we said is basically, a max of 100 or 25% of building capacity is the limit for places of worship. And we have detailed guidelines. Please refer to those. So, let me talk about schools here. Pre-K to 12 schools and higher education and all summer programs and childcare can open now with IDPH approved safety guidance. So there is guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health, and this has to be followed when schools and summer programs decide to open. Next slide. Next. Okay, so what does this mean? We are in phase 4. So this means basically we will see more activities, more interaction among people, more contact, probably more visitations, more social activities, and more social gatherings. And what that means there's also the potential for more exposure. So if there's somebody in the community who has the condition, who tested positive, or who has the virus without knowing, there is the potential of others being exposed to that person. So there is also the potential of more community spread and outbreaks, and individuals still need to take measures to protect themselves and others. And organizations need to have protocol guidelines in place for reopening. When they reopen, basically they need to have things ready in place before that decision is made. Organizations and schools should be able to deal with possible cases at their facilities and among their staff and among their visitors. So there has to be some preparation for schools, for organizations before they move to the decision to reopen or not. Are they able to adhere to the guidelines or not? Next slide, please. So basically, we are in phase 4 now. To move to phase 5, a vaccine has to be developed, and it has to be effective and widely available. It has to be effective and widely available. Also, or there's a treatment basically that's also effective and available. The other condition is basically cases are eliminated. So these are the two conditions for, upon which we can move to phase 5. Vaccine, effective and widely available treatment, these are available, and then, or the elimination of new cases over a sustained period of time through herd immunity or other factors. So if we don't have a vaccine, but over a long period of time we are not seeing any new cases, that might allow us to move to phase 5. What I'm saying here is perhaps moving to phase 5 is going to take some time. So we are yet away from having a vaccine that has been tested and proven to be effective and widely available. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's the potential of going back to phase 3. If we see a rise in positivity, sustained increase in hospital admissions for COVID-19 like illnesses, or reduction in hospital capacity or significant outbreaks in the region. So basically, we hopefully we will not go back to phase 3, but there is that possibility. As we plan for phase 4, the possibility of going back to phase 3 is there. I'll give you an example. If you decide to open your school and then you have several cases arising in your school, and then there might be a need to make a decision to close the school, then some of the measures you had put in place last semester, you might need to go back to those. For example, remote learning and so forth. And Brother Qadri will touch on those. Next, please. Okay, so basically now in phase 4, schools pre-K to 12 can reopen. However, reopening does not mean returning back to what we had last year before the pandemic. So it's not, we will have a new normal now. So we're not going back to pre-pandemic operations. And IDPH, Illinois Department of Public Health requirements must be met before reopening. So there has to be a set of requirements, and schools need to assess their capacity and their preparedness and their ability to open, and while adhering to those guidelines. School staff, students, and families should be prepared for the new measures. And the goal here is to ensure safety of students, but not only students, staff and families of staff and families of students. So what are, next slide please, the four guidelines that basically are mandated now by the Illinois Department of Public Health. These are the required guidelines for reopening schools. The use of face covering is a must. It's required. No gatherings of over 50 in one space. Social distancing as much as possible, and there has to be symptom screening and temperature checks, or requiring individuals to self-certify that they are free of symptoms before entering school, and enhanced school-wide cleaning and disinfection. These are the 5 requirements that must be in place, must be adhered to in case of reopening for in-person classes. If a school is not able to adhere to these guidelines, then they have to consider alternative options, alternative methods of teaching, such as going back to remote learning. Next, please. So what we came up with, and these guidelines, this guidance that we came up with mirrors what we have developed for places of worship. So there are 5 areas here we want to address, and schools should be thinking about these areas and developing procedures and protocols and making sure they are ready for reopening. So there are 4 areas here. One related to staff and volunteer. Go up to staff and volunteer, please. Yeah. No, not this slide.
Okay.
Slide before. Up. One more. One more. Okay. So basically, in this area, you want to work with the school nurse. And I recognize, especially weekend schools, they do not have, not all of them have a school nurse. So now this is the time to invest either in a school nurse or some health personnel for your school. If you don't have, those, basically you want to form health committees to develop guidelines and be in charge of COVID planning and implementation of these guidelines. It needs a lot of work. And having one or a few people in the school who are the go-to committee, the go-to person. There has to be a COVID-19 champion at each school. Basically, you want to develop emergency operations plan. What if a few of the staff get infected, basically they're gonna stay home. How is the school gonna operate? Ensure proper training for staff and volunteers. Assign responsibilities and identify go-to individuals to ensure proper, timely, and accurate communications and implementation. What if a child comes to the school and then the teacher discovers that the child is sick? How is the teacher gonna handle that? What protocols we have? Who's the person who's gonna handle it? So you wanna make sure your staff are trained. To ensure that your staff and volunteers have necessary equipment, protected PPE and supplies. Do they have their masks? Because we wanna make sure they are protected as well. Instruct staff and volunteers to protect themselves and practice everyday preventive actions. Wear masks and avoid handshaking with visitors at all times. And those who are sick should stay home. So there's a lot of preparation now to take place before you open the school. Who is doing what? Do we have the proper training? Do we have the proper staff? Do we have the proper supplies and all of that? Next, please. So there have to be plans developed and schedules for all activities. We cannot go to the gym, in over 50. So assemblies, the same thing. We probably should not have assemblies. It's any gathering of over 50 in one place is prohibited. So we should not do that. So we want to look at the school activities and how we operate. And Product Qadri will touch base on that. You want to review the facility and develop plans for entry and exits and activities that allow for social distancing. You want to dedicate space for screening, preferably, outside of the facility or in an area that, a little bit, far from the, people interacting and so forth. So if in case somebody is positive, you don't want that person to really interact with others. You want to have plans for attendance, record keeping, sign in, sign out. I'm sure most of our schools or probably all have those in place. But now is the time to revisit and make sure we really capture everybody who gets in the building. You want to make plan for the gym, for lunch, for prayers, for wudu, and etc. Okay. You want to designate space to separate people who are sick upon arrival, or those who become sick at the school. When they come, you discover they are sick. What are you going to do? But by the time they're picked up or they're asked to leave the school, if their parents drop them off and leave, where are you going to keep them while they're waiting? So all of this has to be discussed now. Next, please. So in the area of communications and education, schools and school personnel must stay informed about the local COVID-19 situation and they must be connected with the local education and public health authorities. You want to make sure you have the contact information of all students, families, staff, volunteers, and visitors, everybody who gets into the building, because in case you need to inform or notify them about possible cases in the school. You want to be able to reach your students definitely and their families, but also your staff and your visitors who come into the building in case there is a need to. You want to develop and place posters and signage, and you want to have flyers with simple information and instructions in multiple languages, depending on your school population. You're going to share credible information on various platforms, your website, text messaging, and so forth. You're going to educate students and families as well as staff and volunteers on what they can do to protect themselves and others, and your protocols and guidelines. There has to be communications and messaging before school, exactly what parents should, what families, what students should expect, and what paperwork they need, what kind of screening will happen. Next to the next slide, please. Okay, so schools must communicate clearly with all students and families in advance about the new expectations, including the screening, including, you know, the possible extended entry time to account for screening and social distancing, where to enter, where to exit, where to drop off, where to pick up, and visit, you know, visitors of the school, how to visit outside, if you after you drop off your children, if you want to visit for some reason, if you want to enter the school, where to enter and what the procedure there. State with clarity that with screening, people not abiding by the guidelines, some people, those who are not abiding by the guidelines may be denied entry, and you want to have security backup plan, and you need to have security in place, security personnel to handle situations that, you know, might become touchy and sensitive, and you never know what might happen. Hopefully everything will be okay, and our community has proven to be really abiding by these guidelines, but just in case. Next, please. There's a lot of need for training now. So, and offer training to your staff and volunteers on safety and health protocols, how to use and dispose personal protective equipment, how to organize the flow of traffic, how to screen people and monitor visitors, and so forth. There has to be protocols for handling potential cases. People who are discovered to be sick when they come to when they are at the school, where to go, who's gonna ask, who's gonna handle that situation, what kind of information we want to collect from them. And definitely we need to emphasize the need for confidentiality. If somebody is discovered to be positive, we don't really, and we cannot share the name of that individual with everybody. It has to be only the people who must know that information. Okay, there has to be some training about related to conflict resolution and how to deal with people who challenge the rules and might not abide by the guidelines. We're going to provide training for your janitorial staff on frequency, schedule of cleaning, and proper and healthy use of approved chemicals while protecting themselves. So next, please. And there has to be, schools will need some supplies. And this is the time for schools to start preparing if they are opening in the fall. If they are preparing to open some summer programs, definitely this should be happening now. So schools would need screening forms, contact information forms. How are they going to collect what kind of information they are collecting from people? Touchless thermometers to measure the temperature, cones and signage to control students and others, disinfectants, cleaning supplies, a cleaning schedule. Definitely need to have adequate supply of cleaning supplies, adequate cleaning supplies, and sanitizers, PPE for students, staff, and volunteers. Do they have masks? As we said earlier, students must wear masks.
I think it'll
come without mask, would the school be able to, give them a mask, or will send them back home? So we are really suggesting there has to be some masks ready for those who end up coming without a mask or forgetting their mask. So masks to share with community members, with students, with those who visit the school. Tissues and non-touch disposable receptacles as possible. So basically we want to minimize the transmission of the virus as much as possible. Next, please. So now can you skip to the slide on like 5-6 slides on the transition to Brother Qadri's part? Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Yes, here. So I just finished my part, and if there's time, we can address some of your questions. Now I want to give the stage to my dear brother Habib Qadri. He's well known in the community, and he will dive more into the logistics, the operations, inside the schools. And again, this is not meant to be a comprehensive webinar. There might be other webinars coming after this.
Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin wa salatu wa salam ala Rasul Kareem. Jazakallah khair to Dr. Kamal. As you guys have seen right now, you've seen the information of what's been given. On phase 4, on June 25th, the state has Illinois State Board of Education also gave a plan for all the educators, administrators. There was a transitional advisory team of more than 56 total members, which were educators, administrators, transportation professionals, school nurses, social workers, agency staff, who've been working on specific guidelines. As you could see, there are a few things, especially for all the principals of Islamic schools. And I think this would be very important to connect with. We're meeting every 2 months, and especially now, kind of even on our chats, discussing together to get up to make a plan. And this plan is very important. So this plan will help out not just the full-time schools, but also the weekend schools, right? Because at the end, we're all dealing with kids. So we want to make sure that we all share together. So even these slides that you have received, you have just are watching, you'll be getting, inshallah ta'ala. And so one of the key factors is as we go through these topics, but one of the big things is as now you got these guidelines, and they're also at the Illinois State Board of Education guidelines. It's all there, a little bit more detail. There's about 65 pages of information that's there. And as you kind of see, Dr. Kamal, he kind of brought up what are some of the major things that are going to bring that needs to be discussed. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of focus is on just, I'm a very practical person. So the idea is like, okay, now that we have this information, again, we just got this 4 or 5 days ago. So one of the first things you're gonna have to do is get your transitional team together and saying, okay, what we need to do. But what we wanna do is to help you to think about what are some key factors or things that you need to look at to pay attention to for this transition to be more successful. But at the same time, we don't want you to stay by yourselves. So I know all the Islamic school principals who I have great respect for, and we talk. We are going to be sharing our things. So hopefully in about a week or 2, we'll be kind of writing detailed guidelines. Just because we just got this on Wednesday, Thursday, or if someone said I got it done in one day, then I get kind of worried. But now that we're going to get all these things kind of put together, inshallah ta'ala, hopefully for all of us to kind of go ahead and share. So I'll just and then we could go for, and so the first slide, one of the first things that we have to kind of keep in mind, temperature check. It's 104 degrees, right? So home. So what you want to do is when we write that guidelines for parents, you want to tell parents, please make sure you do a temperature check before you even let your kid drive them to school, right? So that's one. But then the second thing is we are also going to be responsible, right? So we have to make sure that we have our own temperature check. So that means we need to make sure we have that supplies, right? And we have that one that's much easier where you could, use that device. You could put it on their forehead because you don't want to go ahead and it's like, hey, everyone open up your mouth, take it out, and double check the numbers. So we're going to have to make sure that you have those the proper equipment. So one is at home, but then the other one is at school. So that's one of the first things that we're going to have to keep in mind, all our administrators from the full-time schools and the weekend schools. And I myself have been a weekend school student and administrator in the weekend school for several years before I joined the full-time schools. The second thing is face covering. Now it's so important that every child needs to bring a face covering to school. And it also, it could be a face shield. Now the question comes into place is 2 things. If suppose a child says, and this is in their documents, well, our parent says, no, my child cannot wear a face covering or due to some health issues, then they need to get a note for us to kind of even consider, right? And that's something that your team needs to kind of discuss and say, well, let's see what this child's situation is for the greater good of the school. So we need to kind of have that. So making sure the face coverings, now even for staff, making sure that they are face coverings. Now some might be discussing on the face shields, and I'm not going to tell you which one's more safe, But the catch thing, the thing we need to figure out, so maybe in preschool pre-K teachers, where they're learning the ABCs, or the Quran teachers, when they're reciting and they need to see the mouth and the tongue and how it works and pronouncing, a face shield might be something that might come into play. So I think keeping those things in mind is very important. Just for all Islamic school principals, I know we had sent out this link to everybody. Just keeping in mind, working with your district, there is some money, more than 25 I think million masks were given to public schools and stuff like that. If you work with your district, and some of you guys have great liaisons with your LEAs, learning agencies, or what you call your district offices. And then you could please make sure that you kind of talk to them and see if that's there, and then some of the PPE money that also for other CARES Act money can be used for specific things like this too. So kind of keep that in mind also as number 2. The slide, I think he's going to bring it back, inshallah ta'ala. Can you guys see the slide right now? Or is this
Yeah, just good. Just a minute. Came off.
No problem at all. No problem. I have it printed out. I have the and then the other kind of thing after the slide also was to make sure, inshallah ta'ala, is the school doors, right? So school doors is very important. Why I want you guys to keep in mind. I'm taking all our administrators and all of our board members throughout the day. So we're going to go step 1 all the way through, right? Then just kind of saying, okay, so now the first thing is when they come in, we had to discuss making sure the temperature checks. Number 2, making sure they have their face coverings. Number 3, the school doors. You do not want to have 300, 400, at our school, we have 700 kids all opening the door, right? Because now everyone's touching that knob. So I think it's very important to have someone by the door when their door is open and kids are walking in, right? We want to start thinking about small things to help reduce any form of the virus being transmitted, right? So inshallah ta'ala, so kind of the third thing you want to keep in mind is the school doors, right? So inshallah ta'ala, as we could get those school doors, and opening and having someone assign, I think will be very good and very beneficial. Number 4, okay, Hamlet's back on the screen here. And the other thing is regarding, as we have school doors, the thing is now you might have a lot of parents like, well, we want to come inside. This is something that you might, in your original letter or in the introduction letter to parents before even school begins, is to make sure that, hey, we are going to try to limit how many people come into the building. The more people are walking in, the more problem it is. Now, I understand preschool pre-K the first day because kids are going to be crying. May Allah bless all the early childhood teachers. This is the toughest week ever. But what you want to do is try to say, hey, if you're middle school, elementary, mashallah, your child will be there, and limit how many people are walking in the building is very important. And then having the school doors or your security officer having the door open so kids are walking in, the less hand touch on specific house, school equipment, school doors, I think the better it is. The number 4 thing, as you realize, the limitation was 50 in an area, right? And 50 in an area. So in the classroom area there, but in the gymnasium, you want to make sure when you have a morning assembly up to 1 or 200, that's something that you need to consider maybe not having morning assembly. Maybe through the classrooms and just using the phone mic system to do the morning du'as, to do the announcements. That's the things that we want us to look at. It's not just about numbers. Now we, as educators, as board members, we need to now step and say, okay, now we have some of these recommendations. How do we maximize it and make it the best possible? Right? So you want to go ahead and say, now that morning assembly is something we're going to consider and say, hey, that might not be a good thing. Then the second thing is, so now we, as I go, I'm going through the day, right? So morning assembly happens. The second thing after that, after morning assembly, will be going to the classrooms. So now there's going to be the classroom. We're going to have to make sure that how is the classroom arrangement. So could it be from the seating arrangement? The seating arrangement, as we know, right now the state has said 50. No class mostly has 50.
I've tried it twice, and then I tried.
Or you need to kind of keep in mind the idea of still trying to space. Yes, the idea is to space 6 feet, but they have given us some flexibility and saying, look, due to rooms and circumstances, that might not always be possible. But the idea as to how to limit that is making sure the desks are all in one direction. So this is something for early childhood parents, preschool, pre-K, our teachers, administrators. We're going to have to think about early childhood, in the early childhood, preschool, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, where sometimes they're in circular desks, right? Which is awesome to have when the kids are in circle, they see each other. But this might be a time that we might have to move some of those equipments and maybe have them on the floor, maybe have like tape where it's say, you're going to sit here, you're going to sit here, or maybe have them in various ways where it's going to kind of keep things a bit more safe. Because at the end, we do want the kids to be there, right? Even research and heads of many of children's hospitals have also recommended that it's been psychologically been tough on kids. So we want to make sure that interaction with kids is very important. But what we want to also make sure is that we kind of make sure we follow the protocols as we can and the best way possible. So that's something that we want to do is look back in our rooms. How can we adjust things? So that means like in preschool, pre-K, kindergarten, the elementary, when we have toys and playing, that's something we're going to have to consider. How do we make sure that if kids are going to play with something that other kids are not going to touch it? So these are things that now as your team needs to kind of discuss and saying, okay, what about this? So even in the upper grade classes, are we going to, or even the elementary classes, are we going to have cleaning supplies ready in case something has, touched, to make sure that we're touching, cleaning our supplies that we have, making sure that there's that soap dispenser and stuff. So this is something that we're going to keep in mind in the classroom. So it's the setting of the classrooms, to the supplies that we have in the classrooms, and making sure limiting the interaction, the physical interaction, and space interactions. Another thing in the classroom you want to think about. The next thing is also keeping in mind is that the transition. So if it's from morning assembly to the classroom or classroom to classroom, as from the transition advisory group, one of the concerns was like, hey, maybe do we limit? Now this cannot happen, this might not be possible in every school because of the space or the number of kids. But one of the areas is that can we in lower grades or elementary grades limit kids moving and having the teachers move to the class? So except the kids transitioning from one class to another, having the teachers go to that classroom so that you limit kids moving from one class to another, right? You can have them in that classroom, if you have windows, have the windows open so there's fresh air coming in. So these are kind of things that you're going to have to look at. Or if you have to transition, then you're going to have to transition in a group where kids can't just like, hey, just everyone walks out, goes where they are. Our teacher might have to walk them to the next room. That way they know when they're walking 6 feet apart, keeping these things in mind. So that's why this transition is something that all of us as educators, as board members, as the building managers of all the masajids and the schools, is something that we're going to have to kind of discuss to make sure that we try our best possible for that. So the other one is hallway transition. But as we go into hallway transition, what else happens, right? Things to keep in mind again. Water fountains, right? Water is something that when you go in transition, kids want to drink the water. So this is something else that they don't want us to use, where the kids go down and use that sprout and they put their thumb on there. It's something we might have to look at. The water fountains you have, do you have the other ones where they have the sensor? So we tell kids to bring water bottles, and then they can fill up the water bottles with the sensor, right? So they're not first touching the little button and then they're putting their mouth right next to the sprout. So that's something else that we might have, to consider, is to block that off, and then keep just, the idea of having a sensor and maybe make adjustments to your fountains. So that's something else as board members. I know these are all costs and stuff, but again, we're gonna have to look at all these things for the safety and security of our staff, our teachers, and all the individuals who are in the building. The other thing that we want to kind of keep in mind is washrooms. So important that in the washrooms, now we're going to have to see if kids are going to go. It might be better to have a group at a time go to the bathroom and come back, and in that way it's more controlled. Or having now that your custodians might have to be around the hallway or the bathroom a little bit more diligently than maybe once every hour that they come and check. But now, kind of after everyone goes, kind of cleaning up. So it's something else to keep in mind. The other thing about the washroom is the faucets. A lot of us have where our kids open up the faucet handles, but we might have to get the sensors. The sensors might be better, so it limits kids touching the faucets, right? Because they're touching the faucet, soaping on it, and they're closing it. They're touching. So these are things that we're going to have to consider. The napkins, right? Are we going to get the sensor napkins so that way they are the towels? I apologize. The paper towels, So this way, just to make things easier. So these are going to be things that we're going to have to consider as we're going through this process through our teams and planning. Again, we are going to try to share. I know all the summer school teachers and administrators have agreed that we're all going to kind of put our minds together, and then at the same time kind of bring it all. But at the same time, every room or every building or every school has their own little uniqueness. And so that's why it's important. Even in the classroom, you might have one class bigger than another class. You're going to have to kind of keep these things in mind. What do we take away from that room to open up the space more? So these are considerations. So the washroom, having someone been cleaning, looking at your faucets, looking at the paper towel dispenser, all these things that even as our schools, we realize now maybe the faucets, we're going to have to change them to the sensory faucets. So these are kind of considerations that are coming into place. Recess in gym, right? Recess in gym is another discussion that we're going to all of us as administrators have to think to ourselves and saying, okay, this is going to come back to this other day, how long the school day is. Right now, they say that if you're going online, that you can, minimum is 5 hours. So maybe we just do our core classes, right? You do all your core classes and stuff like recess. Maybe we'll say, hey, you know what? By then, just go, kids will go back home by 1 o'clock, right? These are things that might have to come into play. Even something of it consider. I know it might be tough, but even something like a salah prayer where we pray in the masjid together might have to be something that we have to consider and say, do we just finish the class and the kids go back home and pray? And I'm not saying, I'm not going to give my opinion here because I know every masjid has their own, speak to the shaykh, and have that discussion, but that's a discussion. Even something like a salah prayer, how are we going to do this, right? Everyone puts their heads down, if they're going to sunnah, things kind of start happening. So these are kind of consideration and stuff that has to play. So something like recess, like even gym, even if you have gym that you have space, but you need to make sure they're spread. And this is so important that any of these discussions, like we have the Skokie Public Health Department, so we've been talking to them. Even when we were thinking of doing a summer program, there were things that we had to consider. Even if we were going to do it outside, like something like soccer training, we realized kids will be breathing and they're going to be breathing hard. Or if they keep their mask on and they're playing, it's going to be hard for them to breathe. And especially in the hot sun, they could get sick. So we kind of decided, hey, no summer program, this year and just wait until the fall. But now even in the fall, we have to discuss, hey, what about we going to do about the gym program, right? And this conversation, how space, or do we have it more just basic stretches, something more like yoga where there's not heavy breathing, having everyone outside if we could have gym instead, separate that, or make it into small groups, or we just cut, so these are things that you need to consider as we plan for with these guidelines that we have to make things better. Now, then the other aspect, and inshallah, we do our due diligence, but suppose if a child gets sick, right? A child gets sick, you need, as the the guidelines brought up, we need to have a designated place for a child if they get sick, right? You don't want them sitting with everyone else, so we're going to have to make sure if you have a nurse or you have the office or a room, that the child will be there until they get picked up. So that would be one. Then the second is to make sure then you have to also, after that child's there, to clean up and disinfect the area where that child is sitting. Third is now the idea, and you have to speak to your local agency and say, what's the protocol? To inform all the parents? And then does that mean that every child, and again, more information on that will be coming up, but then that means every child in that class, if suppose that child, gets sick, you never know, but we find out later that child does have COVID, then that idea of informing all the parents of that class, and what they've said is that class, and that's why the idea is so important to keep classes in the cluster. So if someone gets sick, then that class is the class that has to be called and to stay home for 14 days, right? So these are kind of things that you want to work with your public health departments and so on and so forth to kind of get these things clarified. When that situation happens, so Allah protect, but look, the likelihood, can this happen? There's a high percentage. So you want to have these protocols set into place and saying why it's so important to kind of keep kids in clusters. So if something does happen, then you're just kind of working there and not the whole school has to close down. But again, that's something you and your board and your need to discuss. But these are kind of conversations that have to happen, right? So now when a child gets sick, and then also informing your local health department that this child is sick so they can help you with the planning of how to move forward are kind of things that you need to consider. But now you might also have, which is the next one, is that some parents are like, you know what, I'm not going to bring my kid. I want to come to your school. I love the school. Love the weekend school, but I'm still worried about because there's no cure. Now the cure might be another year. So if the cure is another year, but they still have a right for remote learning. So even the public school arena, if a parent says, hey, I'm not coming, The idea is that when you want to maybe have your classes, you maybe in your building, in your classrooms, going to have to figure out, and this is what we're discussing, is to now tape those classes. So making sure you have the right audio visual to tape those live classes. So that way, if a child is sick or gets sick, they have an opportunity, or they don't want to come because they have like a severe asthma or some other sickness that could only affect them. They have an opportunity not to miss the class, but they're able to still see the class, or at least watch a video, a taped class later. So that way they still have their assignments. So I think that's very important. So that's why you need to be very important that when you make this, there could be a high chance that even if you go online or live classes, we might, if the numbers go back up, we might have to go back to the remote learning. So if you have to go back to the remote learning, we need to be prepared. We can't, I know last time in the spring remote learning for all the board members is that it's not going to be the same kind of spring, or even if some parents are here, then the same one that's going to be in the fall. Spring was an emergency. So you maybe have 2 live classes. If it goes back to a remote learning again in the fall, it is going to be more like a regular day, like, hey, 9 o'clock one class, 9:40 go on the other line class. You know, it might be 9 to 1. There's a realistic chance that even school, if it begins, it might be more controlled, or especially in the elementary scene, or early child, like 9 to 1. Taking away the lunches and taking away that. Again, unless someone has, you know, a specific lunch program that they get from the state. But majority, these are kind of considerations that we are going to be discussing and thinking. So keeping that in mind. So remote blending learning is so important that you also have that in your plan. So when it happens, it's ready to go. So that's why it's so important to get trainers right now. And as we're kind of planning out to get people trained to be very well equipped in teaching online in case that happens. And then even if not online, for some kids who are not coming, but they have an opportunity to go ahead and take, because even if they could be sick, they might not be sick of, that's why it's very important, even if a child is having, maybe doesn't have a fever, but their nose is running and they're coughing quite a bit. Maybe a lot of times you might be like, okay, you know what, he just has allergies. But now with, if they're constantly sneezing, we're going to have them stay home too, right? We got to start thinking that way, not just COVID or go home. It might be, even if someone just has allergy and they're sneezing quite a bit, I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm sorry, but that mucus might be going places. You're going to have to stay home. So these are all the new things that we're going to have to change, and how it's going to change the whole dynamics of how we're going to think of how school's going to start in the fall. And then the last thing is cleaning and disinfection plan during and after school. It's so important to kind of keeping these things in mind, say what we're going to do at school, what resources teachers have, making sure things are safe. How do we clean after school? We're going to clean, because that's going to be something that's going to be very important. That's why even stuff like after school programs is something you want to think to yourself, hey, do we hold up on it until that? And even the sports teams, I know, which for me, sports is huge, but it's something that we have to kind of consider. So these are just some foods for thought that we, as you guys plan in your teams. But again, we will be sharing stuff, and I know all the beloved principals that we get to on WhatsApp quite a bit, and we meet every 2 months. So alhamdulillah, it's a great, unique thing about our city at all Islam schools. We get together, we respect each other, we kind of like each other, and we share it with each other. So inshallah, we'll kind of do that. So these were some things. Jazakallah khair, may Allah bless you. I apologize for going a little long here, but I thought it was just something for all of us to understand.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you to both of you for your presentation. It has been well received. And let me just pose to both of you a couple of questions, and then make a couple of remarks before we take further questions. I have surveyed the chat room and got a couple of questions. If you have more, please list them in the chat room, and we can share those. But the first is, let me, Habib, you made reference to the WhatsApp, because I know there's people that are interested. They want to, the problem with these kind of webinars, you get a lot of information. It poses a lot of questions when we're still looking for answers. So clearly, I'm sure they want to be engaged with your group. Is there any reference, or how do they hook up with your WhatsApp group? How do they participate and share what their concerns and information with you?
Okay, so for the WhatsApp, it's for full-time schools, right? Because we can't have 150 weekend schools. But we will be providing all the information to CIOGC, right? The idea is we're working together as a task force. So the whole idea is now, as we write out the day-to-day plan and give samples of 4 or 5 different schools or stuff, that's no problem. And then you from there to take it. But to be in that initial is just going to get, you know, again, a little bit more tough.
Understood.
Right?
At least you've given us the necessary
These are
clarity.
just for the principals of the Islamic schools, but we are going to work with all our weekend schools and anyone else. And then if anyone, if someone's out here with a full-time school in Illinois or even Northwest Indiana, we have 2 schools from there, just give us a heads up. We'll be glad to have you on the group.
All right, and to follow up that comment,
with
let me just share this with the group. Today's video recording will, inshallah, be processed and uploaded to our YouTube site, and we will provide you with a link either by responding to your emails if you put those in the chat room, as well as it will be on the CIOG website. And also we will, inshallah, develop the website to have this information, including the presentation. We can either send it by your email address, or will be available next week on our website. Now, another question that came up was this. There's a question about space. You both use the term about social distancing. When we talk about a classroom, it may be 30 by 30 or 40 by 40. What are the implications of social distancing for a classroom?
From just the educational, what we received right now is that they're keeping it open, that we're going to try our best, because if not, there's schools. What are you going to do if now you could only hold 10, 15? Where are the other kids going to go? So that's why they've left. There's some flexibility in trying your best to keep space. It might be 3, 4 feet. Now, ideally, I know from a medical perspective, 6 feet is a key. But with all this going on, that's why they had that 50 in a space. But even if suppose someone's going to take the gym and say, this is big, I'm going to separate 50-50. Even that 50 group have to be separate at 30 feet from another 50 group. But then even those 50 kids have to try their best to be 6 feet apart, or their best. That's why even if not, they're saying, they even recommended, if you look in the report, everyone facing one specific way. Like, you know, like the old school teaching environment where straight lines and there's rows. But even the teacher won't be walking between the rows, right? There might be they're going to be 4 or 5 feet away as they're speaking, so that way some of the particles from their mouths are not, you know, touching any kids, and they're going to have a mask on. So that's why there is some flexibility right now. So when we read that report, we're like, okay, you know, and then I think that's just due to all these circumstances. And then on Tuesday, I'm meeting with the deputy governor just on other factors. And I know, board, you might be thinking about this. Are we liable if someone gets sick at the school, right? So that's another discussion, saying, hey, is there going to be some overall thing that's saying, hey, like, you know, that schools don't become, you know, we do our part, but, you know, people, you know, trying to sue or something, right? You know, so that's another kind of discussion that a lot of our private schools, it's not Islamic schools, but I'm a part of a private school of 2,000 of 17 associations, from the Archdiocese to Lutheran schools, Jewish schools, the private country days and all that. So these are kind of discussions that not just Islamic schools are having, but all of us are having.
No, there's a question.
I just want to add to that. If you look at the guidelines when it comes to social distancing, it says social distancing as possible, and that statement recognizes the fact that we have classes that cannot really, 30, 40 students, and there has to be an attempt to separate, make them as distant as possible, physically distant. And the guidelines recommend, look at your room size, look at what furniture you have. All the unnecessary furniture in the room, if you can remove it, get it out so you can separate. You can make the distance a little bit as big as possible between the students. So I just want to emphasize a couple of points before we go. We are not going back to normal, and education and in-person education is not like what we have used to have before the pandemic. And there has to be a lot of education to the students. There has to be an attention to their psychological status and how they are coping. Sitting in that room with a mask on your face for hours is really not something that pleasant, to be honest with you. I go to the prayer and even 15 minutes, doing it for a short period of time. So there has to be a lot of education. And I would just want to touch on one important thing. Now, with the students coming to the schools and the possibility of identifying some of them as being positive, or some of them showing symptoms, and now we have to tell them go home. We don't want this to become a source of bullying in the school. So there has to be a lot of teaching related to that. You know, being sick there's nothing wrong with that, and this is about protection of all of us, and we all could be sick. So it's not, this virus is not for some people and not others. So there has to be a lot of training about this, so this doesn't become a source or a reason for bullying. Or yesterday you were kicked out, or you did not come, what happened, and all of that. You know, especially in certain age groups, this is very sensitive, and we handle it the right way. And then the other point I want to mention is the activities. Yes, you want to limit the crowd size to 50 or less, and you want to look at your gym, you want to look at your playground. But again, being outdoor could be positive nowadays, especially if the weather allows. So look at your, have some flexibility. If you can have a class in the open, and you can separate the kids, have them sit on the grass, and basically do your instruction there while maintaining social distancing. That's something to consider. And the guidelines, they're talking about opening windows if possible. So if your building allows for that, you know, however, you want to make sure you can do that safely. So if you are on the second floor and the windows, you know, the kids can climb and reach to the windows, then that might be a hazard. So you want to look, consider that as well. Now, one other question that came up is the exchange of papers and documents. We want to limit the possibility of transmitting the virus from one person to another. You want to do your best to minimize the exchange of items as well. Because, and if you exchange items like computers, like laptops, like devices, you want to make sure those are being cleaned and disinfected. So, and, as I said earlier, we're in this webinar is basically touching on the surface. More will be coming, and school districts, and I know Brother Habib, he mentioned that there will be other guidelines, more detailed, but again, every school is unique, and you need to have your team, and you need to, within the guidelines, how you want to operate is up to you, but you want to adhere to the guidelines, and that we are leaving that to the schools. So we cannot really enforce, we can just interpret and simplify and share with you what we come up with. But at the end of the day, there has to be a team at each school looking at all of this and deciding the best way to, where students should, how they should move, and how you want to operate your school. You need to have plans for going forward in case we do. Thank you.
Thank you for that input. Clearly, it underscores the need for collaboration among us all. One red flag went up, though, was about Habib, when you suggested a class would be cut off maybe end early, like at 1:30, and those parents that that they may be working during the day, are what thoughts are being given to that, to the extent that there's expectation of some families that the children would be there most of the day?
Right, and I think that's why I think it's so important that each school is going to be unique, or you're going to have to do a survey to understand and say, hey, look, for the safety of the kids, this is what we were thinking, to just make sure that we get their content information. But now we want to make sure that we're not giving more opportunities for exposure, right? And it's human nature. When kids are going to go out to play and in recess or lunchtime, that's going to be tough, right? So those are conversations. I might be inside the building. It's going to be in the classroom, right? Locker partners is another discussion, right? There are so many little other factors that are going to play. Like, okay, now we shared 2 lockers together. You got 2 individuals bringing 2 different things from 2 different places. So those are all these little unique things that are going to come into play. And that's why I think it's so important, as your team walks through, you need to walk through the building and say, wow, this could be a concern. this could be a concern. And that's why, as you get these guidelines and we share guidelines, but as Dr. Ibn Kamal had reminded us again too, hey, you're going to have to evaluate yourself, right? And that school setting, because every building is kind of different and this and that, how many entry points we have, how many exit points we have, all these specific things. So, but no doubt about it, right? And these are going to be some tough questions, but these are things that are going to happen. Or we might say, hey, look, if we could get half our population back home by 1 o'clock and the parents who need to, then we might have to, consider something. That could be something, right? But that lessens the number of kids in the school. So these are all kind of tough questions that we have to ask. And I know you're not going to make everyone happy, but inshallah, we do it with sincerity. We do it for the sake of the kids, inshallah. And we try to follow what the state's telling us. Bismillah, we go.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Well, we've exceeded our timeline, and we do appreciate, we don't want to further impose on both of you, but let me share this with the group. I know in surveying the chat, there is concerns, and particularly as Habib indicated, the principals group doesn't have the capacity, but there is interest in maybe forming a WhatsApp group or some sort of communication link. What we are suggesting to you right now is, if you have a week in school and you want to participate in some sort of collaborative effort to share information, would you please send an email to CIO, use the following email address, info@ciogc.org. There we will be able to collect the names, your email addresses, and then reach out to you and see what would be a good format for us to proceed to be inclusive of our weekend schools. Because clearly weekend schools have special issues and they're different kind of space issues. So we want to be sensitive to the needs of our weekend schools as well. I'm asking you that you would, as opposed to putting it into the chat, please send an email request to info@ciogc.org. We will then gather that information and reach out to you to see how we can collaboratively work to begin to share information with the principals group, with you, as well among yourselves, so that we're all, inshallah, better prepared as we begin to approach reopening our schools, whether they're the full-time or weekend schools. At this particular point in time, I would offer the floor now to the chairman of the Council of Islamic Organizations, Irshad Khan, and I hope I've got you, you're unmuted, but let me just check for some closing remarks for us today. Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you. Thank you for today's webinar. Alhamdulillah, we had a lot and to bring proactively relevant topics for you, so this can help our community. When we had talked about the COVID-19 situation, we said that we're going to come back and share with you when the information is available as we get into the Restore Illinois phases. Alhamdulillah, with all the help of Dr. Kamal and his team on the COVID-19 task, we have been doing that. And now the phase have started into phase 4, and inshallah soon we will be getting into the phase 5. But really the important thing that we wanted to address today is the schools, weekend schools, full-time schools, and the purpose of today's call is to share two things. One, obviously give an input on the phase 4, and then also share what is in works for the schools. So thank you for everyone joining it. I want to thank Dr. Kamal and Brother Habib Khadri for their insight on today's information. More to come. Like Brother Habib said, our plan is to collaborate with all those who are already working on this, and then bring this information in a way that is helpful for you, so you can use it and implement it rather than reinventing it. So that is the role of CIGC, and inshallah we're going to continue serving the community in that way. So thank you again for joining. Assalamu alaikum, and I'll turn it over to Brother Abdullah Mitchell.
Assalamu alaikum. And once again, on behalf of CLGC, we thank you. We thank your participation. We appreciate your questions. And inshallah, we will use this as a further direction and how we can better serve the interests of today of our full-time and weekend schools. So once again, on behalf of CIGC, the panelists, we thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.